Let's talk about what's happening in the West Bank because violence there has been getting a lot worse, while most of the attention has been on the war in the Gaza Strip. There have been more raids by the Israeli military, more arrests, and more Palestinians killed.
There is a great sense of fear and tension here because these raids are happening every single night.
Armed Israeli settlers have been attacking Palestinians and driving entire communities off their land.
كان في الأول في مشاكل بين دائما سويين بس بعد يوم صارت حرب غزة وصلت لدرجة إنه بدك تنحدر.
So what exactly is the West Bank? What's going on there right now? And how does it tie into what's happening in Gaza? The West Bank gets its name because it's the west bank of the River Jordan. It's part of the Palestinian territories that have been occupied by Israel since 1967. Around 2.8 million Palestinians live there. Down here is Gaza, which is run by Hamas. But in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, or PA, is in charge, partially at least. The PA is led by President Mahmoud Abbas, who's been getting a lot of criticism from Palestinians for being weak and ineffective. Now, the West Bank is divided into 3 administrative zones. In Area A, the PA controls things like health, education, and the economy. It's in charge of internal security too. In Area B, control is shared between the PA and Israel. Then there's Area C, the biggest zone, which is under full Israeli control. It's where Israel has built many illegal settlements, and it's where we're seeing that spike in settler attacks against Palestinians right now. More on all of that in a bit. Now, even though you've got these 3 different zones, remember that Israel is the occupying power across the whole West Bank. And in the end, that trumps everything.
The Israeli army can and does enter all Palestinian communities and cities, including those that the PA is supposed to have complete control over.
I am a 27-year-old. I never voted for anything in my life. All my life I've been controlled by M16s that hold by Israeli soldiers. I don't have any civil rights, any life requirement about our life. We have to ask a foreign military that controls our life.
Israel's occupation of the West Bank has all sorts of consequences for Palestinians. Restrictions on their movement and access to their land are a major part of it. Since 1967, Israel has built more than 130 settlements that include homes and infrastructure for Israeli citizens. They're considered illegal under international law. These settlements are connected by roads that carve up Palestinian land, and some of the roads are only open to people with Israeli license plates. The West Bank is also fragmented by Israel's huge separation wall, which eats into more Palestinian territory. There are also hundreds of military checkpoints that Palestinians have to pass through to move around in the West Bank or to cross into Israel. And often people need Israeli travel permits.
Palestinians experience Israeli occupation in different ways. In the West Bank, there are different levels of siege and blockade, if you will. There are villages that are completely isolated by gates and walls. There are other communities that have easier access in and out of their communities. But overall, any movement of Palestinians or Palestinian goods is strictly governed by the Israeli army. So in a way, you have many different prisons within the West Bank. The door and the key is with the Israeli army. They can lock them up and open them up at will.
After October 7th, life in the West Bank has become even more restricted. That's when Hamas fighters attacked Israel, and Israel responded with a massive assault on Gaza. The army also locked down many parts of the West Bank.
It's almost impossible for people to move from one city to another.
The Israeli army immediately fragmented Palestinian cities. So they made sure that the southern West Bank is disconnected from the north.
The UN has reported cases of women having to give birth at checkpoints because of the closures. Life in the West Bank has also become more dangerous. Even before October 7th, 2023 was the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank since 2008. 199 people were killed by Israeli forces and Israeli settlers. Since October 7th, more than 120 people have been killed, including more than 30 children. What's behind those numbers? It's mainly Israeli military raids and settler attacks. The Israeli army has stepped up raids, what they call counterterrorism operations, especially in places like Jenin.
Jenin has for many, many years been a center for the armed resistance here in the occupied West Bank. There are various different factions, various different groups, a lot of weapons. There have been a lot of arrests and there have been a number of people killed here since the beginning of the war, and the situation has got a lot worse. But when you talk to people here, their reaction as to why, for example, this was done here on a street where they say there were no clashes, there were no kids throwing stones, it was a quiet night last night, and this bulldozer just came in and dug this road up. And of course they call it a form of collective punishment.
Those raids are also, in a way, part of the way Israel maintains control by reminding everybody who's boss, right? Reminding everybody that they can enter homes at night, they can detain people.
And a lot of people have been detained, around 2,000, according to the Palestinian Authority.
Israel says it's rounding up Hamas members and supporters, but Palestinians would tell you that they're also rounding up anyone who shows solidarity towards Gaza on social media or publicly.
Most of the people who are detained without charge, and they're held without charge or trial. They're called administrative detainees. It's one more mechanism of maintaining control over the population.
So that paints a picture of the way that Israeli forces operate in the West Bank. And then there's the settlers. They're the people living in the Israeli settlements. Many of them are there because of an ideology that's all about increasing Jewish presence on Palestinian land. Many are armed, and settlers routinely threaten and attack Palestinians.
Now they're a bit more emboldened by the fact that there's a war, and their violence is much more considerable and much more lethal.
Settler-related incidents, which is what the UN calls them, have more than doubled since October 7th. These incidents include settlers putting up roadblocks to prevent Palestinians from accessing their land, vandalizing Palestinian properties, setting cars on fire, and injuring and killing Palestinians, like Bilal Saleh, who was shot dead while harvesting olives on his land. In this video, you can see armed settlers in the field where Bilal was killed. In other incidents, Palestinians say settlers showed up in military uniform.
واليوم علينا هان كمان على المنطقة تكسير كل محتويات المنازل من الداخل. الخارج يعني كان جزء كبير من الشبابيك والبواب، حتى المدرسة يعني ما سلمت من هذا آخر شيء كله مستوطنين بس بلباس جيش.
Settlers also get protection from the Israeli army. Almost half of all incidents since October 7th have involved Israeli forces accompanying or actively supporting Israeli settlers while carrying out the attacks.
احنا جينا اليوم عشان نجد الزيتون هنا، لنا زيتون موجود هنا، لقينا حاجز يعني ترابي هان بيمنع دخول السيارات، وكذلك الجيش والمستوطنين متواجدين هنا دائما بيكونوا.
Noor crosses the barrier and tentatively starts walking towards his olive trees. Israeli soldiers near the hilltop settler outpost begin descending the slope towards him. An armored vehicle moves down the road.
All of this violence and intimidation puts pressure on Palestinians to leave their homes and their land. According to the UN, more than 800 Palestinians have been displaced in this way in the West Bank since the war in Gaza. In this village, 141 people packed up and left their homes after settlers threatened to kill them if they didn't.
The ultimate goal, the coveted prize for the Israeli settler movement is the West Bank, is making sure that this area, this land, is vacated from its indigenous population of Palestinians and is permanently and irreversibly annexed to Israel.
And this ideology is backed by people in top positions within the Israeli government, like the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a West Bank settler himself. In the days after the October 7 attacks, Ben-Gvir said his ministry was buying 10,000 rifles to arm civilians, including in West Bank settlements.
Over the years, what we've seen is Israeli politics going to the right, appeasing these settler groups, appeasing their appetite for more land, appeasing their hostility towards Palestinians, and entrenching impunity.
We're just, farmers trying to plant, cultivate our land, and to live from what we produce. What we can do to face those settlers who are fully weaponed with machine guns, protected by the army, and backed by the government and their leaders in the government.
The violence in the West Bank is getting some attention. Israel's biggest ally, the US, has condemned the recent settler attacks.
I continue to be alarmed about extremist settlers attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. That pouring gasoline on fire is what it's like. It has to stop. They have to be held accountable.
The truth of the matter is, these statements, even though they reflect facts, really don't amount to anything, because Israel understands that they would not be accompanied with consequences.
5 days after Biden's statement, the Israeli defense minister said this.
ומי שמפעיל אמצעים אלימים זה צה"ל, שב"כ, מוסד, משטרת ישראל, הם ובלבד. כל פעולה שחורגת בעניין הזה איננה מקובלת, והיא צריכה להטריד אותנו מאוד.
The attacks haven't stopped, and this kind of violence has been going on for years, and the people behind it are almost never held accountable.
All these attacks that are very well documented face no consequence. So barely any of them get investigated, and almost none of them end up in criminal prosecution, even if they result in the physical harm of Palestinian civilians or even the death.
What we've got right now is a really volatile situation in the West Bank while the war in Gaza rages on. And a lot of people are worried about where all this could lead. We do a lot of explainers on Start Here about current events. You can watch all of our episodes on this YouTube playlist.